While salt has long been a desired and even expensive seasoning, the way that it was stored at meals has changed over the generations, with some of the earliest receptacles being known as salt cellars. Dating back to ancient Rome, the salt cellar stored salt and kept moisture at bay, which might otherwise have caused the valued seasoning to clump. Attesting to the value ascribed to salt, a salt cellar occupied a place of prominence on one's table. In fact, the dish of salt functioned as something of a status symbol, with those who could afford to do so incorporating finer materials and intricate designs. At mealtimes, through the Middle Ages, the salt cellar would be placed in front of the host, at the high end of the table. Guests of honor were seated nearer to the salt cellar as a sign of respect, while those of lower social status, or children, would be seated further away. By the 18th century, most salt cellars were raised on 3 legs, with a rounded cauldron-shaped bowl atop, and were perhaps surprisingly made of silver, as can be seen in the salt cellar from MCHS's collection. To prevent its corrosion by the salt, silver salt cellars featured either a gold-washed interior or, as was developed by the late 1700s, glass linings which separated the salt from the bowl's silver exterior. Into the 19th century, it was increasingly more common for guests to have individual salt cellars next to their plate, rather than the single dish of previous centuries. Accompanying these smaller, personal salt cellars were salt spoons. Spoons largely came about as a result of change in aesthetic, rather than one of hygiene. Indeed, over the 19th century, taste dictated a more whimsical appearance for the salt cellar, as they took on the shape of shells, flowers, or animals, which were mainly pioneered by American manufacturers. The development of anti-clumping salt in the early 20th century facilitated the use of modern salt shakers, enabling them to grow in popularity as a more affordable and utilitarian option. Thus, by the mid-20th century, salt cellars were largely reserved for formal events, falling out of everyday use. However, in the examples that remain, salt cellars continue to add just a pinch of the past to tables of the present.